Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It's Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan for another Inside the Birds presented by our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. It is the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. It is also the Ides of June, Adam Caplan. And you know what that means? It means mandatory minicamp time for the Philadelphia Eagles, who are actually going to have mandatory minicamp this week. It starts Tuesday. You got Tuesday through Thursday, and these are different, a lot different than the voluntary camps. We're going to go inside that, and of course, we're going to have Andrew DeCecco at the open practices writing observations off that as well. So we're going to have everything fully covered. But it's important for us, Adam, as we start this podcast, which is also going to be, it's a two-part pod. We're going to go inside what to expect at mandatory minicamp, and then also, as we did last year, do a little side topic on the Eagles who are most under the microscope in 2024. And obviously that starts right away at mandatory camp because the competition gets heated and then you go right into training camp. So this is an exciting time for the Eagles right now.
Yeah, in fact, it's the last three practices of their offseason, so it's the last chance for a lot of young players who are trying to push for roster spot or push for a role to impress the coaches. So yeah, it's there's no question. And then you've got like 5 weeks off. Because remember, the Eagles now, this week, there are, I think, 8 or 9 teams have the mandatory camp, and the other teams have it the following week. So there are actually OTA practices for over 20 teams this week. And then the Eagles, like they are every year, they finish. But this is the first mandatory camp, by the way, we should mention, with Nick Sirianni. I'm not sure why he decided to do that. Now, you remember there were questions, and Nick was asked about, Sirianni was asked about this months ago about, could there be some changes with after, they had that bad ending, and he didn't dismiss the question. I mean, he said there was something that they would look into, and maybe this is it. Maybe this is one of the things that they may change. We'll see. And we'll also see when we get to training camp, our training camp practice is going to be longer. Are they going to have more practice? Who knows? But, when you fall off like they did late last season and get embarrassed like they did, and obviously there were coaching changes, but what can you do internally to get things back on track? Well, this may be one of them.
Yeah, I certainly think if you look at the combination, right, of the collapse from last year, the fact that they have 2 new coordinators for the second straight year, and both are from outside the building. Last year, it was only Sean Desai from outside the building. And then in general, the remake of the roster, where you have a lot of newcomers, probably more so this year than even the last 2 years. To me, it just makes sense if you put those 3 together to say, we need a little bit more. We need to have our mandatory camps. We need to have guys on the same page with the coaches, on the same page with the coordinators, because what we had last year was not acceptable, right? And so maybe to your point, that's a big reason why this is happening. I'm sure Nick will be asked about that. I believe he has a press conference during this 3-day mini camp. I know the coaches, all the coaches are going to be made available also to the media at various points throughout the week. So we'll get a lot of different perspective from a lot of the new coaches. You mentioned it's important for guys who are battling for spots. Isaiah Rodgers, one of those guys, the cornerback who was suspended last year. Andrew DeCecco wrote a really good story about him on InsideTheBirds.com and how he was impressive early on in the voluntary camps. And he also wrote about Nolan Smith, and Nolan was very candid. I don't know if you saw it, Adam, about
It was good.
He basically said, listen, I had the same expectations for me that everybody had last year, and they didn't happen. And there's a lot of reasons, but I'm looking for year 2 here to make my mark. So it's very good that he was pretty candid about that.
Yeah, I listened to all the interviews, and I was really impressed. I mean, with Jordan Davis, we'll get into him in the show later. No, they have to perform on the field. There's no question about it. Nolan Smith's going to get a better chance than he did last year to get on the field. He shed his shoulder, by the way, he's fine. But look, they're in a position now where a lot of young players are going to have to play because some veterans have moved on. The Eagles, if you go back to last year where they had 7 lineup changes, they're going to have, depending on who starts or doesn't start, up to 14 over 2 years. That's a lot of change. I know there's a lot of change around the National Football League. You don't stay the same usually year to year, particularly because of the salary cap, but that's a lot of change here. So there's also a lot of opportunity for guys to impress here. We'll see what happens.
100%. All right, we had a great interview in the last week with Memphis Football of College head coach Ryan Silverfield for our Patreon community. It was great. Now, a lot of people may not realize this, but Ryan, Memphis has produced 3 Eagles right now, 3, pretty good ones. Obviously, Jake the Make is a Memphis
Hmm.
standout. Bryce Huff, who the Eagles signed in free agency, undrafted kid out of Memphis, and just signed the highest contract ever for a guy who was undrafted into the NFL. So we got a lot of great background info and detail on his play, on his character, on the type of person he is from Coach Silverfield. And of course, Kenny Gainwell,
Hmm.
who it's kind of funny because Coach Silverfield it was sort of in the boat with us. Like, yeah, he was one thing in college and has become a totally different kind of guy in the NFL, but still a lot of really good insight on that from Ryan Silverfield. So obviously, really good content on the Patreon platform that includes also our Q&A that we, or Ask ITB, I should say, that we did last Wednesday. You've got a Thursday chat this week on the Discord channel with our Patreon community, and contract. All the recent contracts that Adam was able to post were Antonio Brown's extension, Albert
AJ
O's.
Brown. AJ
I'm
Brown.
sorry. Oh man, bite my tongue on that
Oops.
one. AJ Brown's AJ Brown's contract extension, Alberto's contract, and some others. This is all the stuff that you get by being a Patreon member. It's very worth it. You got to get in on it. It's patreon.com/inside the birds. And we want to thank our newest member to the Patreon community, Chris, and hope he takes advantage of all the great content we have to offer. Again, that's patreon.com/inside the birds. All right, let's talk, Adam, about mandatory minicamp. It's a lot different than voluntary camp. I think some people think, yeah, the vets come in and then it's just the same, but it's really not. What do you have observed to be the biggest differences between the voluntary camps and the mandatory one?
Oh, the many. I mean, you could list like 10 things easily right off the top of your head, but the one big one is 11 on 11 because I've always, just based on going to OTA practice, not just the Eagles. I used to go around to like the Ravens, Giants, and other teams, but now, depending on what my schedule's like, it's usually just Eagles for OTAs because OTAs are so light. I've likened them to basically, I would say flag football. It's almost all 7-on-7s. Coaches will call it a passing camp. That's really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Offenses should do better than the defenses theoretically, but because they have a brand new offense, new scheme, new terminology, it's mental gymnastics for the coaches. I mean, for the players, the quarterbacks, the receivers. They have to learn this stuff on the run, and this the value of it. Of the OTAs is okay. This is their first time to do it, and then they move on from that. And then the mandatory camp. The cool thing about that is not only is it more 11-on-11 work and 9-on-7. There are 3 practices 3 days in a row. There's no break, which is on the OTAs, you have breaks. You don't typically do 3 days in a row for OTAs. So, and then again, as I said earlier, this is it. I mean, this is it before training camp. So you see an intensity, like the players know this, like this is their time to shine. And I could tell you, Corey Clement was a big one in 2017. This is when the coaches kind of knew, talking to people with the Eagles then, that they knew Clement was highly on the radar after what he did in the mandatory camp was really big for him. Carson Wentz was phenomenal in their mandatory camp
Mm-hmm.
in 2017, where he didn't look so great in OTAs.
Right.
Or it was kind of weird. Like 1 week later or so, he looked much better. He made a big jump, and John T. Filippo told us that on Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
John said that the mechanics changed. It was tough at first, and then it really took off. So you just see there's an intensity because guys know here, particularly the rookies and second-year players are trying to impress as you said, the new coordinators. And
Mm-hmm.
this is pretty important to them.
I would also say that there's 2 things that always stood out to me about mandatory camp. One, the speed of the game gets more when I mean, that's just natural. You have guys who played in the league 5, 6, 7 years. They know what to expect. And of course, it's not the speed of an NFL game, but the speed of practice generally picks up. And when I say that, I don't mean how the guys go from one drill to another to another. That may pick up a little bit too. But I'm just talking about the actual, as you mentioned, the 11-on-11s, right? You're talking about the runs, the throws, the tackles, the not the tackles because you can't, but the getting there, right? Everything picks up the pace a little bit more. So you may have guys
Urgency.
in
Yeah, urgency.
voluntary camp who think like they're doing well and they're standing out and they get to know the playbook, right? And then the veterans come in and suddenly they're not running on the first team anymore because veterans are there, more right?
Exactly.
Like a guy like Joseph Nagata, great, good for him. He was running first team wide receiver without Devontae Smith there. That's probably not going to be the same when Devontae Smith shows up. So he's going to get notched. And I used to talk to veterans about this. Some of them who don't go to the voluntary ones are keenly aware of some of the newcomers and some of the young guys, right? Who are quote unquote having good voluntary camps on the rise. And those guys who might feel that they're on a roster spot, might be a veteran, might be in the last year of a deal. They come in ready to set a tone right away. So just because they know you think Isaiah Rodgers is playing really well. Oh, you think this running back that they just drafted out of Clemson doing really well. Oh, I'm going to come in and show these guys what it's really about. The tone starts to get set in the mandatory camps, and then as you mentioned, then they break and then they come back for training camp. But I've
Yeah.
always noticed an uptick there if for the mandatory ones.
On that, it's the urgency. The urgency is probably the best word you could use. There's just an energy with, like you were talking about, an urgency because it's the time, because they're going back to back to back. I mean, they're not like super long practices. It's just the intensity of it without wearing pads,
Mhm.
without being able to hit anyone. It's pretty good. So you definitely learn a lot more. I was joking with Mike Gill last week on 97.3 South Jersey that it's almost like OTAs didn't happen because it was like you were just saying the depth chart. There are really no depth charts. Really, I just disregard depth charts and OTAs mean absolutely nothing. This is based on 25 years going to these practices. Then all of a sudden, you start seeing what as you were alluding to, what you thought they should look like for the most part. I mean, it's going to change somewhat in training camp, but you start to get a better idea. But I put everything in pencil. I don't wear anything in pen. There's not a lot that you could say, oh, that's definitely happening. You just start to see more,
Mhm.
and it's good. You're right. It's definitely ratcheted up the intensity and the speed of it. You're right on the speed, man. Because again, you have 11 on 11s or 9 on 7s. There's just something about it that happens where you go, wow, this is actually interesting. These guys are really bringing it here.
Yeah.
So,
I've al-
good.
I was gonna say I've always found it funny because professional athletes, football players especially, are some of the most fiercely competitive people in the world, and we discuss Eagles and NFL every single day. So I think sometimes it gets taken for granted just how competitive professional football players are. And it's easy to get that thought lost because all you hear about is less this and less that, and they'd rather
Right.
have, you're right. And that is true. Like the off-season storylines will make you think that players don't want to compete. They just want to show up for the regular season and play. But once you get them out on the field, once you get them there, you just it's like all those storylines. It's done. They want to compete. Once you put them in, even if it's shorts and shells or shorts and t-shirts, as long as there's between the white lines, it makes me think of the old movie Wildcats. You've seen Wildcats, right?
Years
With
ago.
Goldie Hawn, right?
Yeah.
She's like a
Mhm.
coach, and Wesley Snipes on team, Woody Harrelson's on team, right? And it's an inner city high school, and nobody wants to practice. The only way they practice is if the coach, Goldie Hawn, says there's a scrimmage. She says there's a scrimmage. They're all there the next day in uniform, ready to play because it's competitive, right? Nobody
Right.
wants to just do it,
Right.
right? And that's what I think of when I think about that all the sort of off-season storylines make people tend to forget just how competitive football is, even when it is a mini camp. Once the whistle is blown, it's fierce out there.
Right. So, and this is a really good point you made about the veterans. Like they start seeing these younger guys. Maybe a guy or two created a little bit of a buzz in OTAs, right? And they're aware of it. I mean, they're watching the tape with their coaches, so they know. And they also know when guys are drafted. Oh, wait, was this guy drafted to potentially replace me? Okay, that's what you were alluding to. That
Yeah.
there's definitely some of that. Obviously, in training camp, there's some of that in OTAs. So we'll see over these 3 days. I plan on being there, and I enjoy going. Just you start learning, and the only challenges when these guys change their numbers now
Mm-hmm.
is right. Like I think Josh Sweat changed his right when you think like I think he changes to like 19 or something.
Gosh, I hate when they do that. Yes,
19.
it's so hard.
Yeah, I
You
used to
think like
know
you
these.
cover the team long enough,
Yeah,
but
of
trust me, when you with the
course.
helmets on and the jersey, plus some of them, a lot of guys, what I hate most is the midriff jersey where guys curl up their jersey. So if you're wearing 88, could look like 83, could look like 86, could look like 66, I mean, there's like 1,000 different numbers that it could look like.
Right. And then the problem is when you're a fan who wants to buy a jersey, it's like you gotta be careful. You don't know.
Oh, especially in this day and age.
Yeah. I mean, it's a popular play. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell right now, I believe is 30, and hopefully he won't change it. He's gonna be a starter for a long time. CJ Gardner Johnson, I believe, is number 8. And it's just I don't know. What was he? I think he was 23 the first time around, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I thought it was 33. Was it 20? It could have been
I
23.
think it
I
was
can't remember
23.
at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and who knows? I mean, he could change. So be careful buying these numbers, but it's going to be fun this week. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
All right, good stuff. So that's what we wanted to go through because people ask us all the time: is this stuff really important? Is it matter? Yeah, I mean, you really you got two new coaches, you got new schemes, you got everything. The guys need as much time to at least practice and get a feel and a comfort with their coaches as they can get. And as you just said, Adam, this is 3 days. That's it for a long break until training camp.
One thing I'd add,
Hmm.
there is value in OTAs. Obviously, you get exposure, that the coaches get exposure to the players. It's important, and vice versa. But I literally, the only thing I read in, if there's a guy who's just exceptional, like Rogers was really good, so at least they know he's in shape, he's ready to roll. That's significant. That's important.
Yes.
But everything else, not everything, but mostly you could throw out. It just doesn't mean anything because, as you were alluding to earlier, it all changes magically at
Right.
the mandatory camp, the mandatory mini camp as they call it.
Right. I agree. I think that there's so much more value in the players having classroom sessions, having an understanding of the scheme, the personnel, the players around them, way more. And then taking that out onto the field and executing it way more than, oh, this guy had a really good interception or that guy, had a
Yeah,
nice catch
exactly.
out of the backfield like that. We all know going to even into training camp that stuff just comes and goes. Doesn't matter. What matters is their education, their understanding, because they cannot start this season like last year where they literally don't know where to line up half the time. If that happens
Mm,
early on, then you got a lot of trouble. All
yeah.
right, we're also going to take a break, just like the Eagles will after this mandatory camp. We'll take a break and hear from our friends now at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
Okay, let's talk, Adam, like we did last year around this time, about the Eagles who enter 2024 most under the microscope. And that we're talking about, it's sort of team driven success, but also individual. Like this person needs to have a good year, not just for the team to have a good year, but for that person to make sure that he's on the right trajectory and can be on the team the following year. So it varies a little bit, but we identified a bunch of players that we wanted to speak to about being under the microscope.
Right, and we're not just not listing players. We're going to go inside why. There's a
Yes.
cause and effect on every situation. Remarkably, when you look at our list, it's if the guy does perform, okay, then here's what's going to happen. If he doesn't, here's what may happen. So because we always like to look forward, not back. Okay, we know that Jurgens is going to replace Kelsey. Everybody knows that. But what happens if it works, and what happens if it doesn't work?
Mm-hmm.
And as coaches will tell you, okay, what's our option? And this is a huge year for him. This is year 3. This will, you know how the Eagles do it. If they like a player, that guy's going to get it. He's going to get an offer to get extended. They almost always take it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a big monster year for him. We'll get into him in a second, but I didn't realize when we put together this list, it's kind of like we've been talking for the last 2 years. There's been so much change that there's so many questions. There's a lot of upside with this club, but there are a ton of questions.
Yeah, a ton of questions. So let's get into the ones and go really inside based on not just like obvious things, but also what we know about these players from talking to people in the offseason, how they felt these players performed last year and what they need to do in 2024. And Cam Jurgens is a great place to start. I feel bad for the guy. I mean, in a sense, because how do you replace a guy like Jason Kelsey? Like Cam Jurgens could play like 15% better, 20% better at center than he did last year at right guard, which was pretty decent. And still, that may not make up the gap between what Jason Kelsey brought to the offense compared to what Cam Jurgens can bring to the offense. Because as we know, it's not just about blocking the guy in front of you. It's about blitzes. It's about flipping plays. It is about understanding how the defense is aligning. There is so much subtlety and nuance to playing center that Jason Kelsey had nailed down in a Hall of Fame career that you can't possibly expect Cam Jurgens to know in a finger snap. He can be good, but the idea that he can be Jason Kelsey this year is a little bit, it's very far fetched.
And right, nobody's looking at it that way. What they're looking at is, okay, this is our center, and the club hopes for many years to come. What can he be as an athlete? We know pretty good. I mean, you mentioned right guard, he's pretty good. Now he moves to center. We doesn't have a ton of experience. He did in college. But remember, he was a tight end. He went to tight end. He was a tight end to start at Nebraska, and then he moved to offensive line. you just nailed the most salient point of all here. Can he direct traffic? Not only is it scoping pre-snap, but helping Hurts, as a former Eagles player told us, can he get the team out of bad plays? That is absolutely major that you only get with experience. There are going to be some tough snaps for him. You could expect that. That's coming. But overall, handle it mentally when it doesn't go well. Just play well enough where you're not worried about him. Where you go, okay, where the naked eye says, okay, this was not bad. Like this is we can live with this. Where if it becomes a problem, are they looking at Matt Hennessy, to potentially replace him in season? Like you hope that doesn't happen. It probably won't happen, but you just hope that it's not even a consideration, because this has been their plan. This is their plan to replace Kelsey when he retired, to go with Jurgens, and here we are.
Yeah, I've heard that it's been said that Jurgens did play 2 years of center at Nebraska, so he is understanding of making calls and checks at the line, seeing certain things. And I would have to say, I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification, because the college game, I don't think you see as many exotic defense. You see a lot of exotic offenses, but as far as defenses, as far as spinning safeties, pattern matching, sim pressures, things like that. I mean, Nebraska in the Big Ten, there are some teams that can do some kind of things up front. Obviously at Penn State, Manny Diaz did a lot of that, but I just don't know on a week-to-week basis if Cam Jurgens has seen that as much in Nebraska. He certainly hasn't, as what he's going to see this year in the NFL. And to be honest with you, until you do it, like you can watch it on tape, you can study it, you can know it, but until you do it, it's a totally different story. And, I imagine there'll be some growing pains. One of the things we had heard about Cam, great athlete, that'll help him. I have a feeling he'll be a really good staple of the running game, because they'll base it on his ability to move around and get into the second level, just like Jason Kelsey. But you worry about twisting, stunting, sim pressures, delayed blitzes, red dot, things where he has to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming. He just has to, you just keep the confidence up. Communication with his fellow lineman and Hurts has got to be paramount. I mean, look, it's not like he's a rookie. This is his third year as an NFL player. And by the way, the tape was pretty good last season. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. Now he's going to center, and this is a big one. So yeah, in fact, they've got another big one. I mean, everybody could have their list, and I know this is a big talk radio thing, but who's got the most pressure on him? We call it who's on the microscope the most. I would vote Cam Jurgens. It's just, it's one thing if they were just a Pittsburgh type offense. Okay, they're just a run game deal. Well, they're although obviously they brought in Barkley, but still, this organization wants to be thinking, they're always thinking pass. Now we had Barkley into it. Now it's like, this is a whole new thing. We're not used to talking about the Eagles having a great running back. Sanders is great here, but Barkley's at another level. So this is a lot here for Cam Jurgens. We'll see how it goes.
All right, let me finish the book on Cam for this reason. All right, because this is an under the microscope show. Let's go the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is if he is not good enough, if he really struggles. Remember, he is the center. He is the middle pressure guy. We know Jalen Hurts, when pressured up the middle, has a tendency to want to bail out of that pocket early, right? He has got to be able to help keep pressure out of Jalen Hurts' face. Jalen's not the tallest guy in the world, which is part of the reason why sometimes he bails. He doesn't see over that incoming pressure all the time. So that in alone is a big reason. It's not just about Cam in year 3 and that extension, but can this offense function the way it needs to be if, again, worst case scenario, he's not up to the challenge. So at least he's got right guard. At least he played well enough last year where you can be optimistic he can make an improvement. I'm not anticipating worst case scenario. I'm just saying if it's a worst case scenario, that's not just bad for Cam, it's bad for the entire team in the offense.
Right. Well, before we move on to the next player, I agree. Before we move on to the next player, is that his season this year, because it's year 3, after the season, he's eligible to get his contract extended. This season will tell the team what they need to know. They don't give them all the answers. They won't have to guess. They have access to the tape, and they'll know. I mean, this season, how it plays out will ultimately decide whether they try to extend his contract after this year. That's where this thing's going to end.
Right. All right. So let's move over one spot to right guard, because we've been talking about this for quite a bit as far as the biggest question mark on offense for the Eagles is their offensive line and the new faces. Tyler Steen, second-year guy, third-round pick, going to step in at right guard. Well, I'm sorry, he's going to be given the chance to win the right guard job. He will be the front runner. They want him to win the right guard job, you would imagine. Now, unlike Cam Jurgens, who we can sit here and say, Adam, has at least tape at right guard on the offensive line from last year that was good enough so you could say, all right, we can see him progressing well at center. There was only one start for Tyler Steen, and it was rocky. It was rocky and iffy. You know, that was the intel we got. I think even John DiFilippo one day on the offensive breakdown said that there were times he struggled, so he really needs to be developed.
Yeah, it's just look, it's a new position for him. Last year, you know, it's not easy. People think it's hard to go from guard to tackle, but don't tell offensive linemen that. This is because now you're playing inside a phone booth, going inside a right guard here, and that's where Jurgens was. So it's going to be tough. But they don't really have, like, when you really look at it, it's kind of Hennessy's a backup center and right guard, as we said before, he's never started a game at. I would say that, and I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but these 3 days starting tomorrow, if the mandatory camp is not good, if they're alarmed by it, you're going to see them sign a veteran. If they think it's good, I'm just saying that because Hennessy, with his injury history, they got to be careful. It wasn't just the knee injury that kept him out of last season, the entire season. He's had other injuries. Plus, again, he hasn't started at right guard.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to have to, like, it wouldn't stun anyone if they wound up signing an interior lineman. But the good thing is what we've heard is Steen so far so good. Last year, as we noted before training camp started, he was way off on the technique part of it, footwork and hand usage, but we had no idea that they wouldn't even let him compete for the job. That was a stunner to me.
Yeah, I remember it's like we kept saying, when's the day that Tyler Steen is going to get some right guard reps? And it just never, it was Cam Jurgens and Cam Jurgens.
Which told you, they gave the answers to the test. You didn't need to guess. They just told you he's not ready.
Yes, 100%.
Decisions, the depth chart decisions tell you. And we're going to learn a bit this week. I know it's not physical like training camp, but you just start to get a little bit of an idea where Steen's at in this camp.
Absolutely. So yeah, he definitely under the microscope. I mean, that makes this whole center right guard deal under the microscope. Let's talk about the offense from a skill position standpoint. Paris Campbell is a fair person to say under the microscope, especially with the Devontae Parker retirement, because the Eagles really need him, A, to stay healthy, and B, you know, not be a star, but just be able to handle reps, make catches if the ball comes his way, establish a rapport. Because I would say his likelihood of making the team really increased after the Devontae Parker retirement. It's almost hard for him to not make the team now, just based on numbers alone.
I disagree on one thing. Paris Campbell is inside outside ability. Parker did not. Now where I think he's now, this is a little bit of a stretch, but if Anaya Smith like blows everybody away in training camp, I'm not saying they would consider cutting Campbell. I'm just saying that at least they would know a guy, because Anaya Smith is an inside receiver. It could push Campbell, which he probably needs, because you take Parker off the roster. Where are your veteran backups? They just don't have anybody. Wilson's a 6th-round pick rookie who dropped, to the 6th round. Ngata, who you mentioned earlier, was not drafted. John Ross hasn't played football in a long time. Let's not forget about that. Jacob Harris has not played meaningful football in a while. Britton Covey's an inside receiver only. Austin Watkins, hasn't really played much on game day, and Shaquan Davis was undrafted free agent last year, so there's really nowhere else to go.
Right.
And Campbell, again, they need someone who could play outside.
He can do that, right?
And what's that? He can, but he's not really. See, I know Sirianni.
That was his natural position, to be honest.
It is, but I know Sirianni's like he tries to shut people down when we talk about the X and Z positions. He's like, well, we only do it inside and outside. Well, I don't remember. I'll ask Cosell. Greg would know better. Has he been mostly a Z receiver, an X receiver? I'll ask Greg that next time I talk to him. Mm-hmm. But right now, the only backup with experience who's playing on the outside is really Paris Campbell.
So, right. That's kind of why I thought. Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. But the thing is, though, with AJ, I don't think one had a thing to do with the other in terms of, because AJ Brown, had Devontae Parker not retired, he was going to be AJ Brown's backup. Like that. Right. That was pretty much with the way they saw it. Mm-hmm. They may see Paris Campbell as only being able to play Devontae Smith's position. That's another thing we haven't really talked about much. Who's Devontae Smith's backup?
That's
Campbell.
That's a good point. That's why I thought it was. That's why I kind of thought Paris Campbell would be the natural guy, because they don't really, for all the reasons you mentioned about who's like 4, 5, 6, 7. There's just not a guy that you could rely on. I mean, I can't think John Ross, unless he is amazing, is going to make that. He would be a natural boundary X because of his speed, if it's still there. He says it is, but he's not a physical guy by any stretch of the means. So I
No,
don't
but
know.
John,
So maybe it's
John,
he enters this camp under the microscope because if he's Paris Campbell, because if he can stay healthy and
yeah,
prove that he's good, and he'd be a good chance to make the team and be relied on.
yeah, and the guarantee in his contract's really small.
Mhm.
It's just I know that it did not go well for him with the Giants. They basically benched him by the end of the season, so that's you have to wonder. But he is healthy, and we know he's talented.
Right.
It's just he's got to perform, man. This is the story with a lot of these guys. We'll get to Devin White in a little bit.
Mhm.
There are a bunch of guys here on 1-year deals, and which they did last year, but this group is way more talented.
Mhm.
But it doesn't
Oh yeah,
guarantee anything, man. Does not guarantee you anything. You got to perform.
that's true. All right. We'll pivot to defense in 1 sec. I just want to throw in this. Like, we didn't really. I think you can't have a sort of under the microscope discussion after last year without saying a little bit that Jalen Hurts and the tight end are both under the microscope. The starting tight end, Dallas Goedert, his ability to stay healthy and be a little bit more productive. They've got to be under the microscope a little bit, because if they are not meeting expectations, then this offense just can't be as good as it should be.
Oh,
Fair?
just in terms of perform. Yeah, because he's
Yeah.
certainly they're pretty much. Like I was looking at his contract a couple days ago. They're pretty much locked in through 2026. And even if they, again, this is extrapolating. Even if the wall fell out, so to speak, the next 2 seasons, I mean, there would be some guaranteed money they owe for 17, excuse me,
Mhm.
27, depending on what they do with him. He's got these what are called advanced guarantees on his contract. It was the compromise to not get a lot of fully guaranteed money at signing, but yet he's got them based on guarantees that vest the year before. That's the so-called advanced guarantees. We'll talk about that when we do a contract show later
Sure.
this month. We'll explain what that means. It's fascinating. But bottom line is, yeah, Hurts has got to play well. But you could say that about other guys. I mean, you could bring up some other players who have to perform. But in terms of guys who have contracts who have contracts for the future, getting them or not getting them or being brought back. I mean, you see this list here. And based on also injury history, there are a lot of guys on this list.
Right.
That's the kind of list this is, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah, that's what I meant by under the microscope. This is more about the team being what it wants to be, as opposed to individual worrying about his job status. For the team to be great, those guys got to pick it up a little bit from last
It's
year.
both. It's both
Yeah.
with all these guys. I mean, they're depending on some of these guys. I mean, it's Josh Sweat. We'll get into him in a second. I mean, he was kind of a surprise he was brought back based on what happened. But you know what? This is the value of a 1-year deal. He's got to prove it.
All right, let's pivot over to defense. No surprise we'll take when we say that Jordan Davis here, year 3, a guy they traded up for, top 15 pick, has to be a more viable. No, he has to play more like he did for the first month and a half of the season, but more in an individual game and over the entire course of the season, or else it's going to be trouble.
Yeah, and this will ultimately decide whether they look to extend or just say, we're not going to extend, but it was decent enough that we'll roll over his 5th-year option. That option will be due early May in 2025. This is a pivotal year for him, and I love listening to what he said, folks. Go to YouTube. The Eagles did a good thing last year. I think they started putting all the press conferences on YouTube, and really love what he had to say. He talked about his diet, and he's down to 350, and then he was over 350 last year. But it's one thing to say it now; it's another thing to do it. And the microscope, again, everybody could have a list. To me, Jurgens is number 1 on offense. Jordan Davis is number 2 on defense, and there's nowhere else to go. This is the story of this team. Like with their depth, like they don't have anyone. Marlon Tuipulotu, okay, I mean you can go to him. Of the backup group, he's the only one with experience.
Mm-hmm.
So look, he's also, by the way, he's actually on a contract year. This is his 4th year all of a sudden. I don't know how that happened, but it is. But bottom line is, you're right, man. Jordan Davis, this is it. And he's so gifted. And I just remember Greg Cosell going out of his mind when he goes, man, if you heard from anyone on Jordan Davis' tape, I'm like, why asking? He goes, it's unbelievable. Wow. He was like, this before we did anything with him. He was so excited because, as everybody listening knows, Greg's extremely critical, but he just goes by what the tape tells him. He was like blown away. He loved it. He doesn't get excited over anything. He was like going out of his mind with it. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And then it unfortunately fell apart.
Yeah, it was ephemeral. I will say this before we move on from Jordan, that just talking to people as much as you and I have in the NFL, or people who are involved in strength training and things like that, there is a big difference between being in shape and being conditioned, or thinner
Condition.
and being in
Yep.
condition.
Yep.
Weight loss is great, and obviously there's some cause and effect there. If you're overweight, you're not going to be able to condition. But just because you're at your weight doesn't mean you're great conditioning, stamina to be able to play more snaps. This kid has never really played a whole lot of snaps in any game going back to college. So it's not just about being thinner. He's got to show he can last longer in games.
Stamina. Right. You're right.
Yeah.
Stamina. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because conditioning, for those of us who lost a lot of weight, that's one thing, but to go out there, and we'll learn, and we're going to look a little bit harder on this because we clearly missed it last summer. I don't know how, because he lost weight. We'd said this. They were so happy that it came in early in 23 and was in there after the season, and he seemed motivated. But you just hit on it. He just has not played a lot of snaps, so there's no guarantee here. There's we'll see what happens.
A lot of work to be done.
So far, so good. What's that?
A lot of work to be done is a fair way to say.
Yep.
Nakobe Dean. Yeah, Nakobe Dean. And these guys, I always say, go hand in hand, because Davis's responsibility is keep people off of Dean. So if he's not doing his job, then it's harder for Nakobe Dean to do his. We saw Nakobe have the 2-foot injuries. So this is year 3 for him, Adam. So it becomes very, very pivotal for team success and for individual contract success for him.
All right. So before we move to Devin White, I remember you had a note, which is interesting, that yes, he never missed a game, but clubs were worried about his frame. He did have, like, they listed, like, there were a bunch of injuries he had, but he played through them in college, which is great.
Yes. Clubs had information on stuff I didn't even know about, and I don't think you would know about until we talked to them and say, oh, okay, I didn't know that was a concern. Okay.
Right. And then he had a pectoral injury. I believe his pectoral, without looking it up, it was at his pro day. He didn't have a good pro day, because we were still stunned that he dropped to the third. There was never any real talk in scouting world about him going in the first round, but we're like, wow, he dropped to the third round. Okay. Well, maybe now we see. Now, you can't predict foot injuries. He never had a foot problem before in college. It was more body frame.
Right.
But then, so this is obviously a huge year. Again, this is his 3rd year. If he blows it up, he can get his contract extended. If not, he'll just play the 4th year out. And then obviously you throw Devin White in, who's on it guarantees. I mean, he's pretty much going to make over $4 million this season, no matter how well he plays. But he's a guy who's trying to rebuild his career on yet another 1-year deal.
Yeah. I don't want to get too far ahead. I feel like Devin White in a Vic Fangio defense can do some really good things, especially within zone and running with the 3 and carrying the 3 up. But I also feel like there's a potential for him to start off really good, and then the tape evolves and you see certain things, and then you worry about the adjustments offenses make against that and whether he adjusts with it and Vic does. But that's a conversation for, October, November. Right now, he just needs to be able to claim this job, be disciplined within Vic Fangio's defense. And I mean, the athleticism takes care of itself. That you don't worry about.
Starting experience, and it's like he's got such a wonderful opportunity here, because the Eagles, one of the things Eagles do a great job of in terms of understanding and contracts, if a guy proves himself, they're not going to, more often than not, like the Gardner Johnson thing was a weird, they tried. He overvalued himself. That's a completely different story. They tried. Like, I'm not going to ding the Eagles in that one. They tried. They was a priority. They just didn't get it because he thought he was worth more than that. And he got humbled. And he's back. That's a good thing. But Devin White, it's like, if he plays well, he's still relatively young. They're not going to walk away.
Right.
They're not going to walk away. I mean, he turns just 27 in February. It's not been an injury issue with him. It's overrunning plays, trying to do his own thing, trying to be you call hero ball. That's what the coaches call it. Like, if he just plays with discipline, he's probably going to be back, but we'll see. He's got to do it.
Sure. I mean, they brought back Nigel Bradham after he played well. Nigel Bradham played well enough to earn an extension from the Eagles. That was like $8 million.
Yeah,
that was like pretty good, but he didn't play so great that the rest of the league wanted to go shower him with a lot of money too. He had some injuries in his past. So you wonder about Devin White because he's been an All-Pro before. If he plays really well, it might be tough to keep him, but certainly he'd be someone the team would want to keep if he played well.
Exactly.
And the only reason I brought up that point about how you can start off well and then you wonder about the adjustment is that was kind of what happened to Kazir White 2 years ago with Jonathan Gannon's. He was like a house of fire, him and TJ Edwards in September. But as the season went on, we started to see less of Kazir White, and the feedback we were getting, people watching tape, was not as good as it was the first 5-6 weeks of the season. So you just wondered about the counter to a very athletic guy and how offensive coordinators are looking about exploiting that. So that's all.
just real quick before we move on, it's really interesting. If you look at this list of players, Paris Campbell, former second-round pick, Jordan
Mhm.
Davis, Eagles trade up for high first-round pick, Nakobe Dean, well loved in the scouting community, Devin White, a high first-round pick for the Bucks, high pedigree player in terms of gifts and talent and stuff. He just, he faded. It's interesting. You look at Cam Jurgens, a second-round pick, Tyler Steen, a guy that they're all pretty gifted players,
Yes.
but they all have questions.
100%. I mean, you could argue 45% of the NFL is guys on 1-year deals who are trying to get to that level that they used to be at, or a little bit
Yeah.
under. And sometimes you hit on it. You get Patrick Robinson and Chris Long, and sometimes you get Terrell
Oh.
Edmonds or Justin Evans.
Well,
It's just
we got to do a 2017 show. You just maybe as soon as you set it up, because just some of what's funny about that team is that if you talk to the Eagles, I'm sure they would tell you the 22 roster is more talented. If you really, as you say, if you take truth serum, that the 2017 roster was not as good as 22, and the reverse happened in terms of winning the Super Bowl.
Yep.
But it's interesting how things wind up happening that you don't expect.
Sure. So the last guy in the front seven we're going to talk about clearly the microscope might be shining the brightest on this guy, at least for his own, job security, is Josh Sweat. I mean, he obviously took a pay cut to stay. He's coming off a really bad last 7 weeks of the season. You watch the tape and you know about his knee history, and you wonder if there's not a correlation to the drop off. I mean, the discipline, everything, Adam. I mean, this guy is, the big question is, can he get back to being what he was going into 2023, which was I think a guy we both identified as maybe our favorite overall guy on the defense for what he was bringing. I mean, he was just so tough.
Such a great story development, coming from this horrific knee injury, leg injury from high school. Or the questions whether would he be able to just play football again, just to lace him up. And you fast forward, he was a rundown only guy for early in his career. Then he progressed. It's really a great story development from that 18 draft, which was phenomenal. They only had 5 picks, but he's certainly been a major success story, as has been Mailata. But see, because Vic Fangio's new to this team, I know he knows about Sweat because he was around the Eagles team in 22, but now he's actually going to be coaching them. And Jeremiah Washburn's responsible for him because his edge rush group. I'm fascinated to see. He is on a 1-year deal. As you mentioned, he took a pay cut. He's another guy. Microscope's on him, and everybody could have their list. He's right up there. But I know one of the teams we spoke to who played the Eagles thought he was dragging his leg a little bit. He didn't quite look the same as you were talking about. And that may be, we don't know. We don't know what the issue was. Might have been freelancing, because I know there was some of that going on with the Eagles defense with Matt Patricia. I don't know. But bottom line is, this is a huge season for him.
Yeah. And listen, Jason Avant and Quentin Michael were pointing that out, watching the tape and showing people during Q&A episodes last year at the end of the year. They thought it too. We don't know. I mean, and we don't like to speculate about injuries, but when you know that this is what he's doing, like they would freeze the frame and show, like it kind of looks like he's dragging the leg, as you said, and you know about the history, then I think it's fair discussion there. All right. I want to go to the back end, and there is one guy in particular, Adam, who may stand to benefit the most from a good season and lose the most if he has a bad season than the next guy I want to talk about. But first, I want to take a break to hear from our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you hop into Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam just sent you. You will get a great deal. If not, you can always go to SkyMotorCars.com.
Go to where the pros go, but real quick, the lot of professional athletes go there. I mean, their list is pretty impressive. The guys that get cars there, it's pretty cool. A lot of Eagles, by the way.
Yeah, a ton of Eagles, absolutely. All right, I was alluding to this guy. He's back with the Eagles after 1 year off. CJ Gardner Johnson, the type of contract that he signed, Adam. I mean, if he winds up being the CJ Gardner Johnson of 2 years ago, but stays healthy, like sees it through from beginning to end, that contract he's got, you can see him get into year 2 and maybe even year 3 if he continues. If he does not play well, if he doesn't stay healthy, even last year he only played like 3 or 4 games, then the contract looks a lot different. Roy, it's structured, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like it could be a
Yeah,
1-year deal.
yeah, we put the structure on Patreon a couple months ago, and it really is a 1-year deal. It's basically 1 year for 10 million.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the guarantee in year 2 is only his base salary, which is the minimum base. Obviously, they would walk away from it if he's doesn't play well, or he gets hurt or whatever. But this guy is so unique. He does stuff you can't teach. His nose for the football is incredible. He's a really good football player. I know it's a little bit subjective. He's got a smaller frame, so you never know if he's susceptible to injury, but pectoral injury, give him credit for coming back early. Lacerated kidney, depending on who you spoke with, his last season with the Saints, arguably the NFL's best nickel defender from the secondary. I mean, he's a phenomenal football player. And I love it. Speaking of press conference, his press conference when he came, his first time he was able to speak to the media here was phenomenal. He's a funny dude. I know he doesn't stop talking, and we'll talk more about him in the offseason. I have a very funny story to tell you.
Nice.
I've talked about it when I was with the Lions and Jaguars at training camp.
Oh yeah,
I got a little bit more to that one. I was talking to
great.
someone who was at that practice. Yeah, he's an awesome player. It's just, as you mentioned, he's got to stay on the field. That to me is the only thing with him. The talent level is unreal. You just got to stay on the field.
Yeah, because if he's not, then you're back to square one of last year. You're talking about Reed Blankenship. You're talking about Sidney Brown coming off an ACL injury, and a different type of player, by the way. A good player in his own right if he's what he's supposed to be, but not the type of player C.J. Gardner Johnson has been in the NFL. And so you're really thin at that position. I still think that there might be a move at this position, Adam. You just never know because of the numbers and the depth there. But even if they make a move, like picking up a guy at the end, it's not going to be someone CJ Gardner Johnson-esque. It's just going to be a move for depth. This guy has to be healthy and has to be productive. It's just it's like a period end of statement type thing.
Yeah, and he's a playmaker, and we'll see we don't know Fangio in terms of how he would use him. So we'll see. I mean, is he playing more in the box? Is he intermediate? Is he mostly back? We don't know. I mean, we'll learn more as we go along here.
All right, the next 2 guys under the microscope, familiar names for different reasons. Avonte Maddox came back on a 1-year deal, has been a good nickel corner when healthy. He just has not been healthy very often, including last year, missing almost all the year, even the year before. And then Isaiah Rodgers, who, Andrew did a great job of pointing this out in the story. People think of Isaiah Rodgers, Adam, as the guy who just had 1 year off because he was suspended, right, and hasn't played in a year. But if you go back to 2022, he got hurt at the end of the year. So I don't believe he played the last few games of 2022. So it's been more than just a year. It's been quite a long time since he's played an NFL game.
So with Isaiah Rodgers, and I know it's OTAs. I don't read into it very much, but if a guy balled out, you got to talk about it. Guy did pretty well from what I understand. It wasn't just when the media was there. We had heard that he did pretty well. He's really played outside corner in the NFL. Clubs saw him more of a transition to inside corner because of his body frame. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing with Rodgers. We'll get to Maddox in a second before we close this out. If Rodgers has a chance, because I know they have a lot of outside corners, but no offense to the other guys, this kid's pretty gifted and he runs better than a lot of these other guys. If he's phenomenal in training camp and in the mandatory camp, it's starting with mandatory camp, but then in training camp, not only will he make the team, he's got a chance to be a kickoff returner. And who's to say that he can't beat out? There's the only guys who are guaranteed a role are more or less Cooper DeJean because he was a 2nd-round pick, but Ringo's not guaranteed anything. I mean, he should be on the roster. I mean, he put some good snaps up late. Eli Ricks was a really good story last season. He's not guaranteed anything. No. So Rodgers is on what we call an old school make good contract, but you know what? This league's all about performance. If you ball out, just like with Corey Clement, who's an undrafted free agent, they know it. This guy's going to be a part of the team. You never quite knew it would be that special in 2017, which is incredible. I'm just bringing that up because Rodgers is on a prove-it situation here. He's got to prove himself. So far, so good. But they have, when let's say Slay's not with them in 2025, they got to kind of figure it out. Who's the outside cornerback position for the future? They got a lot of guys, but they got to figure it out.
100%. And that's why we did this. These are all the guys that we feel are under the microscope entering here, the mini camps, the training camp, and the 2024 season. It's been fun. It's been good. Next podcast, we'll obviously be talking about the mandatory mini camps and some other things. That's going to do it for this episode of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the birds. Be sure to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com and on Twitter at phlsportsnation.